Olivia. I think maybe just to open up the conversation, I think, you know, all the background conversations there this morning and that this topic of the call to action, we do seem to have this pattern of a say-do gap. So 98% of our participants in the survey this year believe in the case for change, believe in the benefits. Maybe just to bring Carol and Orlaigh into the conversation, coming in here today, your own maybe individual perspectives on the, sort of the key challenges. What is this inaction challenge we seem to have? And maybe I'll start with Orlaigh here.
Okay, thank you. I suppose I'm fortunate because I come from an organisation as Secretary General of the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation, where I have a 43% female management board, and the two layers below me are all at 44%, and we have a 4% gender pay gap. So why are we like that? And if I look across at colleagues in other government departments, or indeed across the private sector, where there may be no women on the management board, and I think, Brid, you highlighted that in part of your conversation. I think some of it is about role models. I think some of it is about sponsoring. I think some of it is shining the light on the data. And certainly from a government perspective and some of the work I'm doing, there's 4 Secretaries General who have taken this as an action to ensure and enhance gender in the workforce. So we're looking right across the gamut. How do we facilitate people with flexible working? How do we facilitate people on maternity leave, which can act as a major barrier in a career path? How do we look at every potential aspect? And some of the research we have done, you know, where you point to things like confidence, women, confidence levels, where you look at why don't people put themselves forward for promotion, and there are definitely different gender aspects. So each of those requires thought and action. And I think the data certainly shines for us. I think from a government perspective, when you look at the work we're doing, and I would sit on the Cabinet Committee that deals with these issues, again, the gender pay gap, and outing the data, as Brid said, and we have a commitment in the programme for government, and we intend to bring legislation forward on that, which will initially start looking at companies with 250 employees, and then over a period of 2 years to work it down. So each of those outs the data, but it doesn't solve the problem, and I think that's what you're saying. So how do we take the action now? And it's all of those things. There isn't one big bang thing that's going to work. It's right across the gamut. Even simple things. 15 years ago, I worked for the European Commission. We were not allowed to convene a meeting before 9 o'clock in the morning or after 4 o'clock in the evening. And that's 15 years ago, because it was to facilitate people. And yet I still am asked to go to meetings at 7:30 in the morning, which is fine. I'm of an age where I don't bring children to school. But if you ask other people, and that applies to both men and women who have family responsibilities. So small things can make a difference. But my big thing, I think, is around the sponsorship, it's the role modelling, it's the leadership, and it's leaders who bring people through their organisations then. And we all have a role in that.
Thank you for that. And a few points I think we'll pick up on through the course of the conversation as well. Carol, maybe I'll bring you in there.
Sure. Well, I suppose, you know, being a woman who spent most of my career in professional services and all of that working around technology, I spent a lot of that time being one of very few or the only woman in the room in a lot of scenarios with my clients and in my teams. And I suppose I also lead on the Connecting Women in Technology Network for EY, and I sit on the External Steering Council for that. I know some of those ladies are in the room today, which is an amazing network in terms of attracting, retaining and promoting women in the technology sector. So I'm really passionate about it generally, but I do think that, you know, the data is key in terms of actually informing, you know, what actually the position is. And then I absolutely agree, if you're not measuring it and tracking it, then, you know, then you're not going to be moving in the right direction. You're not going to actually do anything about it. I also think there's a piece around if it's not happening naturally, and if we keep on doing the same things the same way, we're going to just keep getting the same outcome, which is not the outcome that we want, or that the data would tell us that, you know, delivers the benefit. So I think we do need to force it. And then I think, I suppose, as I think about my life as a working mother, a mother of 2 girls and 2 boys, and I've had 3 maternity leaves if you want to try and work out the maths around that. I'd really like to think that they will all have equal opportunity, no matter what choices they make and no matter what paths they choose. So I think we really have to take it seriously, and it's not just tell us about it, show us, in practice, really make a commitment and really deliver.
Very good. And I think there's a pattern there around data and data driving action as well. Maybe we'll just come back to data for a second, Orlaigh, if I can. You mentioned there the gender pay survey that's been discussed, imminent legislation. Maybe just to expand a little bit on that.
So that will track, and the idea is, as I said, we would start with companies, the larger companies. We've about 250,000 companies in Ireland. So if you look at those who have 250 employees plus, you're probably looking around 500 companies. So it gives us a starting point. It gives us a chance to test. But we really need to be very careful about what data tells us as well, because one of my colleagues said to me recently, he's facing quite a strong demographic and a lot of people retiring. And he said, I'll be recruiting new people. He said, it'll have a fantastic impact on my gender pay gap, even if I do nothing in terms of employing more women, simply because the pay rates will drop. So data always has to be interpreted carefully. But having said that, I think when we get the survey data, it will out, and it does shine a light, and it does make people think of how they can address it. But if you look at the current workforce, like a third of women are employed in the education and health sector. So you have huge sectoral disparities. And that's going to shine a light there. And quite often, and what you will see is, and what really drives the gender pay gap, is the seniority levels. So we need to out that. It's not just to look at the pay rates, it's where the balance is between the senior people and the more junior people.
And I might maybe bring Brid in there. I read, and I was at the launch of the financial services research you did earlier this year around sort of the gender pay and gender leadership differential. And maybe just to expand a little bit, so we've talked about the pay gap, but some of the other factors in there was around the challenges. And maybe start to shift the conversation towards action a little bit as well, your view.
That research was really interesting because we did it with our financial services subgroup. So we have a number of subgroups now, including agri-food, which Gary referenced earlier on as well. But the financial services group decided to do some research to understand the organizational issues and also to speak to individuals. So the research was conducted among the HR community, and that confirmed what you would expect, the pyramid kind of structure in terms of fewer women in senior management, which, by the way, lest it go unsaid, is shocking in relation to financial services, because that's an area where the workforce is fairly evenly balanced, and yet the leadership is not coming through. And unlike the technology area or engineering, the STEM-related areas or construction that have had that traditional male model, what is it that's holding women back in financial services? And I think it really shines a light on culture and the environment. So in looking at the numbers, you really need to look at what the experience of people is within different organizations. The individual research was very interesting in that we had over 1,600 responses. Interestingly, although it was a survey obviously on gender balance, 45% of the respondents at individual level were male. And there were some really interesting insights from that, including the importance, and I referenced this point in my comments, the importance to people of both genders now for a different way of working. So both genders very much valued flexibility, for example. It was interesting that the people taking advantage of flexibility, there was a difference in the experience between men and women. So men really valued and took advantage of more flexibility in terms of starting times, finishing times, working from home. Women valued that enormously, but were more represented in terms of taking reduced hours. So I think that some of the actions that we need to be taking are really in the area of moving towards more equality in the parenting role. And I think that's something both at national level and at organisational level that we can and should be addressing.
There was, we talked about it briefly this morning as well, and Orlaigh, you mentioned this as well, the confidence factor, competence factor, and Gary talked about sort of talent versus experience as well. Could I just ask you maybe just to draw out a little bit about that, because it was a really interesting discussion on the day as well.
Yeah, the research again was interesting in terms of the career kind of choices that people make. And the male individual participants thought that one of the real barriers to women progressing was personal choice. Women didn't see that at all. They saw much more the actual structural and organizational barriers. And women didn't identify a lack of confidence as being an issue themselves, but the HR professionals who completed the organizational survey did see lack of confidence as an issue. And I think there's a real interesting conversation to be had around confidence. And we do here, and it's really important to remember, don't mistake confidence for competence. But equally, I think that sometimes that lack of confidence is actually a risk awareness, and that, you know, women can be more aware of the risks in taking a higher level job in terms of their own competence, but also the punishment that is meted out to a woman who fails. And this has been a feature where there have been very few women. If a woman fails, it is a woman CEO who fails rather than just Josephine Bloggs. So I think that confidence gap is sometimes a risk awareness and understanding of what can go wrong. But I do think organizations can help with that. I think language in the recruitment process really matters. And I've seen examples, very practical examples, of jobs that I was very familiar with and that have been advertised in new ways. And the field coming forward is very different. So it does make a difference. So you do need to look into every process as well as the outcomes to actually make sure that they're really inclusive.
And clearly there's a role there for leadership in those organizations in terms of sponsoring and driving through those changes. I do want to come back to data, because we talked previously about sort of the role of data, and what gets measured, gets managed, what gets reported gets more scrutiny, as you said, Brid, particularly if it's externally reported. Carol, maybe I'll bring you in there. So the GDPR is sort of front of mind for many people. It's about 4 or 5 weeks away in terms of coming into effect. But we need data, we need to collect data, and it is sensitive data in many cases to manage our D&I strategies and to drive towards those outcomes. So can we just talk about the sort of the potential conflict or challenges in there, if indeed there are challenges?
Sure. Well, I suppose I personally hate to think that GDPR became the excuse for not doing this, and it shouldn't be a barrier. Obviously, the regulation is about putting the data subject at the heart of it. But I suppose we talk to our clients about 3 principles on GDPR. So one is transparency, so being transparent about why you're collecting the data, what you're doing with it, how you're protecting it, all of that, making sure you have the right controls around that and communicating that in a transparent way. Then there's a piece around consent. So obviously, you cannot make it mandatory for people to report this. Obviously, you can articulate the benefit of doing that, but they should opt into this with their free will and have the option to withdraw that consent as well. And then it's about purpose in terms of what are you actually doing with the data, and I suppose what benefit are you delivering that, and I suppose documenting the rationale for that and articulating that, as well as actually if we move to a position where this is driven by regulation, then there will be a legitimate basis for capturing that data. Now, obviously, you can't be able to link the data back to an individual, and you have to be careful about, the use of analytics and profiling, but absolutely you can use the information where you're looking at cohorts and you're looking at to drive decision making and all of that, as long as you have the right organisational technical measures around it.
Great, and Orlaigh, maybe you want to come in there?
Just to touch on that, and absolutely, as Carol said, but we need to look at it in terms of the opportunities as well that it can give us, and being able to use data and match data. So, for example, we've recently run data across our revenue, which is on income sources, and our higher education. And you can track where people are. And that gives us hugely rich data that we can use to make decisions. So it's not about identifying individuals, and as you said, you can't do that. So it's actually looking in terms of, I would be a great believer in joining data sources, because we've had fantastic, rich insights into Irish society where we're able to join up administrative data, and certainly where we can track outcomes. So even in prior times, you couldn't track somebody from primary school through to the higher level education, whereas it's that ability and then to match and see where people end up. And I think even yesterday I attended the financial services, the launch of the apprenticeship schemes for financial services, and there's a role where, again, you're tracking data, but you're tracking it on diversity, and that includes both social, and you can look at women, and it's just an ability to out as well the really good performance and shine. Sometimes we talk about the name and shame. We don't do enough of the name and fame, And we should be doing far more of that as well, because that gives examples of where the good performance is that people can take on and practice likewise.
And I think where legislation is going around data and data protection is about giving all of us as individuals control of our data. And this comes back to trust and consent. So if we trust that our employer is going to use that data to the benefit of the organisation and ourselves, we'll buy into it. So transparency. Things have turned red on my right here, and just to keep us I'm very mindful. Last year it was very much about getting a data set and having a conversation around, okay, where is the D&I agenda realistically in Ireland and what needs to be done. This year is very much, we believe in the opportunity and the call to action. Maybe for each of you, as we conclude, what would you say to people in the room here in terms of tangible actions that they could take away? And Gary talked about action starts with action, right? So something distinct they can take away and do differently from tomorrow that might start turning the wheels of their own individual organisations. And I'll start down the end with Brid, please.
Well, I think at a very simple level, think about what your own role is. So you all have organisational roles, and hopefully you've got a lot of ideas this morning about what your organisation should be doing. So I'm not going to focus there. We've said a lot about that. But think about what you as an individual can do, and whether that's in making an appointment for a job or a project. Think beyond the best person for this particular task and looking at the narrow qualifications. Think about the best person for this team and for the broader organisational needs, rather than just the narrow focus of each individual decision. I think if everybody thought in their own respects as well as organisationally, what can I do? And as Orlaigh mentioned, supporting and sponsoring women, actually think about the conversations that you're having every day with male colleagues and female colleagues about what the messages you're giving in terms of inclusion. Because I think we underestimate the power of our individual conversations. And at this advanced stage of my life, I'm shocked at times when people refer back to something I said to them in the 1970s. Happily, they never mention the bad things that I said. It's usually something positive that they remember. But you can have an impact just by a few words, and people don't underestimate it.
Thank you. Carol.
Yeah, I think one of the terms that was used last year was this concept of career watching. So for all of us, who is the person that is watching out for us in terms of our career and what's going on in our life? And I think if we all played a role in terms of having a person like that to look up to, like a role model, which is really important. Often there maybe isn't one, it's maybe the combination of a few different people. But also if we all took a personal responsibility to look at watching the careers of the people coming up behind us, whether they're male or female, they have children, they don't, whether they have aged parents, whatever stage of life they're at, to be conscious of what they need and what is going to be supportive to them in their careers moving through. And I would have a number of examples of that in my career where people have done that for me, or where I've been able to do that for people in my team, regardless of gender, but potentially it's more around nationality or ethnicity or stage of life or whatever it is. So actually we need to be really, really committed to making it sure that people are able to bring their true selves to work, and that you're actually empathising and supporting that.
Something about career stewardship, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Niamh, I'll give you the last word. Or Orlaigh, I beg your pardon, Orlaigh.
No problem. I think I'd go back and pull out your organisation chart and go down 2 levels and look across the levels, because what you find quite often in organisations is women tend to be in the corporate areas. They tend to be quite segregated within organisations. So look at your talent and pull people into different roles and give people different opportunities, because that's what shines when they go to the next level. That, again, it's diversity of experience. So I would say pull out your organisation chart and see where women are located in your organisation, and then look at possibilities for
Make
them.
a bet.
Yeah.
Take a bet. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.